Eric Topol here for Medicine and the Machine. This is a real privilege today because we're getting to talk with Professor Zeynep Tufekci, and this, I think, is going to be fascinating because as I've only known Zeynep through her writings, she has to be one of the most interesting people I've ever gotten to know through words. She is on the faculty, professor at University of North Carolina. She had her training education in Istanbul, and also her PhD at University of Texas at Austin. And her area, if I could define it, and it's broad, but it basically is the intersection of digital, artificial intelligence, society, sociology. So Zeynep, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's a real treat because you've been a real leader and great thinker as in tough times, even before the pandemic, no less intra-pandemic. So I guess I'd start off with this quote from the recent profile about you in the New York Times at the end of August, which was, quite extraordinary. And it was a quote from epidemiologist Julia Marcus at Harvard, and she said, "I've just been struck by how right she has been." And that really is so darn true. So you've been on a lot of things that you write for the New York Times. You've been writing a series of amazing articles in the Atlantic that we've talked about. How do you get it right?
Well, now that you said it, I'm almost certain to get the next thing very, very wrong by regression to the mean, for certain. Thank you. I mean, the profile was quite kind, and thank you for the kind words. And I guess what I could say is that I just was at the right intersection for the work I was doing. As you've noted, I'm a professor, and that has given me a lot of flexibility in terms of my work. And I have a very eclectic training. I have a computer science background. I have a sociology background. I also have almost like an on background. I have learned a lot about a lot of different things, partly because my own home field, technology and society, has been so, until recently, it wasn't even recognized as a field, what we were trying to explain, that these digital technologies are changing the way we live, interacting with society. And I've had this broad interest in many disciplines over time. And I have, some training in some education and sort of also my own learning about a lot of the relevant things for this pandemic. And I used to teach sociology of pandemics as part of my introduction to sociology classes, because it's it's such an interesting example to try to get students to think about the globalized world. Right? Because it's, in some sense, it's a little abstract, but then with pandemics, you can talk about, network theory, you can talk about globalization, you can talk about all sorts of things. So I would talk about it. Of course, what in the world is more interesting than viruses, right? So I would sort of read about that side too. They're fascinating little buggers. So I would read about all of that. So and plus, I was doing research on social movements in public sphere in Hong Kong last year. And I'm very interested in authoritarian governments and authoritarianism, partly as a result of my own research, partly because I'm from the Middle East. So when this thing started hitting, like late December, end of December, we started hearing, like very end of December, about this mystery viral pneumonia. I had read a lot about SARS. I had seen SARS as, wow, that was close. I think a lot of people had taken the message that, wow, we can do this, we can contain it. And I was I got the other message. I thought, this is really, really lucky. Like, I thought we were within an inch of a major pandemic, and we were lucky to be able to contain it. So I just started watching it, partly because I was hoping to go back to Hong Kong. I was thinking, when do I go back? But when I saw this viral pneumonia, I thought, oh, wait, what's going on? And then there was very little news for a while. There was all these sort of conflicting news. And then when China, the government shut down Wuhan, with authoritarian governments, there's a very sort of rule of thumb, let's say, that you look at what they do, not necessarily what they say. And I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand the nature of the Chinese government. They may be authoritarian, but they're far from stupid, right? They're not, they're very strategic in many ways, and they're not going to shut down a city of 11 million.
Right.
Over something little. So when they shut down Wuhan, I thought, okay, everything we've been told, that it was a little thing, there was little human-to-human transmission, there, all those things, that just, none of that must have been true. Because if it had been more like MERS, they wouldn't have shut down the whole city. So I knew it was a big thing. So that was my first sort of moment. Mm-hmm. But that said, if you look at my Amazon orders, it's kind of funny. By January 7th, I'd ordered masks. Because on January 7th, early on, I thought, okay, this is a big deal. Maybe something's happening, but let's see. When Wuhan shut down, I started ordering my sanitizer and started canceling trips because I thought this is big. And then a couple days later, because I'm a researcher, I, of course, go read the papers. A couple days later, when China finally started letting Chinese scientists publish, there was, I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine. It was our first sort of small epidemiology, because there weren't that many cases, out of Wuhan they published. And strikingly, it said that some of the patients were showing atypical clinical sign. They weren't necessarily having fever. And now, once again, I wasn't a complete novice to this. I knew that with SARS, that it came with fever, and that's how we were able to, point temperature guns at people and identify them during the infectious phase. And that's when I said, okay, we're going to get hit. And I started tweeting about it. I started saying, okay, this is, we're going to need millions of tests if this is the case, if we can't just detect them. And it must have gotten out. So that was January. So at that point, I still hadn't really thought of a role for myself besides, I'm ordering my own supplies. I'm canceling trips. I'm kind of getting ready for something to happen, but I didn't really see a role for myself. And then weeks kept passing, papers kept coming out, to their credit. I mean, once they were allowed, Chinese scientists were really giving us excellent material to say, whoa, this is, what we can expect. But all around me, it was like everybody else was on a different planet. I was looking at newspapers, and I was seeing op-eds that were trying to tell us, don't panic. Right. It's okay. Beware of the pandemic panic. This is just travel bans are just, Trump's racism, or all sorts of discussions seem to be everything about, it didn't seem to be about what we were about to get hit with. Yeah. It seemed like just sort of dancing around the actual issue. And then, we had all these other things. We had cases popping up all over the world. And then I started watching in my own sphere, people planning conferences, planning trips, planning all sorts of gatherings. And at this point, we're in the middle of February, towards the end of February, asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic spread is being documented. Some people are spreading without necessarily being very ill. All sorts of cases are popping up around the world. And I'm thinking, what are we doing? Why aren't we getting ready for this? I couldn't find articles to send to people. I couldn't find, I was trying to convince people, let's not hold these big conferences, let's not do these things. And in fact, I'm generally a big critic of Silicon Valley. I think they have a failure of imagination about their own products. I have all these sort of articles, which is what the New York Times profile was trying to get at. I was writing about the misinformation potential of Facebook in 2012 and being laughed at, to be honest, at that point, because it seemed like that that seemed silly, but it wasn't. You know, you just have to have this imagination about what can happen. But the tech industry, I think partly because they do have a stronger interface to China, like they don't think of it as this far away place as much as the rest of the country might. They started reacting. They started canceling conferences. They started doing things. And then I saw a lot of people treat them like they were paranoid.
Right.
And then the preppers were like all in on this. And people, of course, the preppers are always prepping for the next end of the world. So there was this sense that taking this seriously was overreaction. And that's when I thought to myself, you know what, I got to write something, because there are things for which you can overreact, like, you know, children being kidnapped. It's a very rare event. When it happens, it's of course every parent's nightmare, but it's not something you should be thinking about all the time. It is rare. That or the sort of doomsday prepping. Those things are indeed exaggerated risks. But on the other hand, this one is the other kind. This is the kind of thing that occurs regularly. Pandemics are, you know, I don't need to tell you or this audience anymore, but pandemics are this recurring feature of human history, and preparing for them is not just crazy doomsday prepping or, you know, tech billionaires becoming paranoid and buying bunkers. So I wrote a piece for the Scientific American that I owed a blog post. I normally write about tech and society. I owed them a blog post. And I said, can I write about this? And my editor, who's very nice, just had his first grandchild. He was like, yeah, sure. And like I wrote the draft. And normally the process is I write a draft, he takes a look, somebody copy edits, because I'm not a native English speaker. I always drop the does and a's because Turkish doesn't have indefinite and definite articles. So I was expecting like a day to at least copy edit. And well, he had a little baby, first grandchild. He was like, all right, click publish. So it still has some typos, I think. We might have fixed some of them. So he just published it. And that piece was basically stuff that is not surprising to anyone anymore, but it was trying, as far as I know, it's like the first mainstream piece trying to explain flatten the curve, which of course isn't my idea. This is well known to any epidemiologist, but I just felt like people weren't being explained that if we get slammed with cases, the hospitals are going to suffer, and that's going to be terrible. I try to explain things like the case fatality rate or the effective R. Those are not like these fixed numbers. It depends on how we get ready. I try to say, look, this is not something that only doomsday preppers do. And then I had very practical suggestions. Try to stay home for a couple of weeks. Right? Because right now, at this point, we're not completely sure about transmission routes, but if you stay home, you're fine, right? It's not yellow fever. So I just wrote this very practical thing explaining some basic epidemiology that, I mean, nothing complicated, explaining, you know, the need to get ready and sort of the social aspects of some of this. And it turns out at the time, that was probably the only piece trying to explain this that maybe I couldn't find many others. Like there were people trying to warn us, but this was a very practical thing saying, right, you know, here's what's going on, and, you know, buy a couple of weeks of food, you know, get your stuff ready. Don't go on that trip if you can avoid it. Not just for yourself, but let's not have a hospital overload, because that's just terrible. It got a lot of, you know, Hillary Clinton retweeted it, and it went really viral by internet standards. And I'm still hearing to this day people telling me that they convinced, especially like their parents, to not go on that cruise, to like they did their shopping, they had their like things, and so that was my first step into writing about.
Yeah, well, it foreshadowed a lot of great things to come, and that's what I thought what we'd do is, you know, break it down to 3 areas that have been extraordinary, that you have written about and led the charge. And then I want to circle back to kind of pre-pandemic with Twitter, Facebook, and that kind of stuff. But so that is a great segue, because the next thing you got onto, if I'm not mistaken, after that was you were really the front runner, the person that really influenced the mask story.
Yeah, that
You had
was
a
next.
tweet storm March 1st,
Mm-hmm.
which was incredible. And it was like, a hyper alert. Hey, you know what? Masks might help here. And then you wrote, you put it together, at least a synopsis of it subsequently in the New York Times in your op-eds. But why don't you tell us what you were thinking then and what has been the influence? Because you changed the CDC. Even people there called it a tipping point. I mean, that's kind of amazing, really. So what were you thinking? I mean, it's a respiratory virus. And when you look back, you say, duh. But you were ahead of that curve, as you usually are.
Thank you. So what happened is after I wrote that, in that particular piece, masks were almost already sold out. And I did say in my Scientific American piece, if you can't get a mask, don't worry about it. Wash your hands. That's what we know anyway. And then I got a lot of people getting mad at me saying, because I'd linked to like a list that included masks, I got an enormous amount of communication from like epidemiologists, health communication specialists saying, don't tell people to use masks. Masks are harmful. I remember thinking, say what? I know. I remember I got this enormous pushback from the public health community saying, masks don't help and they harm. You're harming people. And I just sort of started thinking, what is the argument here? I tried to really understand because I can understand the argument that we don't know enough might be a potential thing I can discuss, but the harmful one was the first one that got my really sort of antennas up, because I didn't realize how widespread their harmful message was. And I tried to ask all these professionals with PhDs and with MDs saying, how are they harmful? Like, please tell me, because I, of course, don't want to harm people. And what am I missing, right? What is this? What am I not understanding about this harm? So I heard two basic things. The first argument was that it would provide a false sense of security, that people would wear masks and not wash their hands. First, let's even assume that hand washing is more relevant. Let's just which doesn't seem to be the case, but let's leave that for a second. So that's kind of more my domain, sociology. False sense of security is an attractive intellectual argument. It kind of gets the contrarian in you thinking, unexpected result. But it's been researched to death and debunked for so many previous safety devices, from seat belts to helmets to everything. It always comes up. Whenever there's a safety device, somebody comes and says, what about false sense of security? And then we do research. And what we do find is that even if there is some individuals for whom that applies, the safety of the device, the first order effect, always overwhelms the sort of this little tail thing you're thinking about. Plus, even when it does, it's more like things like recreational skiing or something, where thrill seeking is the business, right? It's not really sort of applicable. And if anything, from everything we know about humans and sociology, I thought the mask will increase compliance with everything else, because you're signaling something's wrong. Yes. You're signaling so if people are trying to avoid a deadly disease, they're not going to be like, oh, look, I'm wearing a mask and just, do everything else. They're going to be like, I'm going to do a lot more. And of course, since then, we have a lot of research that does show mask wearing increases compliance with everything else. So that was first off, I immediately said that doesn't make sense. Like, false sense of security and risk compensation, there's no, this has been researched. It doesn't work. It doesn't apply to this. If anything, we would expect the opposite. So and it's my field. I could just immediately say that is not the correct reason for harm. So what else is going on? And the other thing I heard was stuff like, what if the outside of your mask is contaminated? And I'm thinking, that sounds like success to me, right? If the outside of my mask is contaminated, it's because I didn't breathe that thing in, right? Without the mask. I just was having these debates with PhDs and MDs, and I'm sorry, I'm a PhD too. I don't want to insult anyone by category, but these people who were otherwise, they were telling me the outside of your mask is contaminated as a risk profile, whereas I'm thinking that's exactly the point. I want the outside of my mask rather than my, nose to be contaminated. And then there were all these arguments about people can't figure out how to wear them, which also didn't make sense, because when people don't wash their hands long enough, we have campaigns. Plus, I mean, they're not intubating patients. Like, if they wear them a little less than perfect, that's still more than zero masks. The comparison, like the healthcare comparisons, are with sort of better wear versus, sort of worse wear, not never no mask. So that didn't make sense either. And then, of course, masks for source control cannot be measured with randomized control trials, because you're not measuring an individual's sort of individual's trajectory. You're measuring a community thing. So none of the studies really addressed this. So I kept sort of trying to find what the argument was. And then I finally realized people were in a groupthink. The real thing that was going on was, I think, a fear of the mask shortage and people hoarding.
Right.
And
exactly.
we had talked ourselves into a corner, because instead of sort of saying, look, these things are probably useful, we don't yet know how useful, but of course it makes sense for a respiratory disease to use masks as source control. There's no downside to them, but we're afraid of the shortage. So we should talk about the hoarding and shortage, right? Something that treats the public as a partner. So there was almost this hostility to the public, and it had kind of cornered itself into a groupthink among the public health community too. Whereas we were, instead of saying don't hoard them, we were saying they'll harm you. And I thought, this is terrible, right? Because we're going to have to change this policy. And when we change the policy, people won't believe us, because, in a pandemic is a communication emergency, right? Be right, be first, be credible. We're going to have to switch messaging at some point, and then we're not going to be credible. So you'll see my tweet storm for March 1st.
Yeah,
I waited.
Yeah.
I waited, though. I didn't just go swinging, because I thought, there'll be some doctor or, public health professional who will come and write the definitive thing saying, let's come to our senses. And I waited till mid-March. And then I thought, you know what? Thinking like a sociologist again, groupthink sometimes can't be broken by the group, because the doctors and the public health professionals, it might be harder for them to go against the CDC or the World Health Organization, because what needs to be said is the CDC is wrong, the World Health Organization is wrong. And that's, of course, a terrible message in some way, right? Because they're not wrong in the sense that they're terrible organizations. In this particular thing, they happen to be wrong. But of course, we want them to be more trusted in many ways. So I said to myself, okay, I will do this. And I thought, I'll get canceled, right? I will go write a piece saying CDC, because I never thought in my life I would be writing a piece saying the CDC and the World Health Organization are wrong on a medical topic, right? That's not how I envisioned my life ever happening. But I thought, you know what? I can take this risk, because if I get canceled, I get canceled. Because I thought I'll be branded like an anti-vaccination person. It'll be something because that's what it'll sound like to lots of people. But it needs to be said, because we have a pandemic, and we have, people are still traveling. And plus, of course, I had, because of my Hong Kong connections, I had been looking at, the infectious disease specialists in Japan I got onto later, but South Korea and Hong Kong and Taiwan, and I was watching them. And they have top-notch people there who've been through SARS, and they were making a very good case for mask wearing. So it wasn't like this, the science was there. And I just thought, all right, I'm going to publish this. And if we're going to go out with a bang, right? I had access to the New York Times. I thought I might as well end my career in the New York Times, because it just needed to be said. It needed to be done. So I got I submitted. I got really lucky. I got an editor who let me not hem and haw. Right, I didn't get to say because there's always this sort of, well, the CDC says this, but in my personal opinion, blah. No, I didn't do any of that. I said, look, just think through this. This is not something that requires an advanced degree in this or that. It's a respiratory disease. We have evidence of, like, CDC and the World Health Organization are saying wear a mask if you're sick. But we have tons of papers now saying that there's pre or asymptomatic spread. So just like on face value, you don't even know when you're sick and spreading. So there should be no debate about this. And I understand the shortage, but that's something we can talk about like adults. Trust the public. Let's talk about the shortage and how to deal with it. I said, let's do cloth masks till we get better, all of that. So I wrote that thinking, all right, my last public piece, I will go back to my life as, hopefully the tech world I'll still write tech criticism. So I wrote that. And as you have alluded, it, instead of ending my career, it opened the floodgates to the debate. And I'm honored I got to play that role, because it's just amazing that it did that, partly because it was a low bar. The arguments against masks made no sense. And the groupthink just kind of blinded, I think, lots of people to the fact that they really made no sense. We were gaslighting the public, so to speak. And then a lot of people sort of started saying, yeah, this makes sense. And then a lot of I started hearing from doctors and epidemiologists and public health people saying, yeah, I was thinking this too. They just couldn't really
You got a new group thing going, actually.
Right. Yeah. So that's how we got into all the rest of it, which, parks, ventilation, over dispersion. So that's after I did that. And by that time I had probably read, at that time it was still manageable. I had probably read every paper, because when I do this, this is my privilege, is that because I'm an academic and because I also can read these papers, I might not be a virologist, but I can sit and read and try to sort of understand the statistics and the claims and all of that. So by like mid-March, we had a lot of papers, but it was still a manageable number. So I was just reading the papers. And then the next one started happening because I started seeing things like parks being closed. And we started getting the super spreading reports, and all the super spreading reports were indoors. And so this really interacts with sociology. And we know from HIV, we know from other research that if you don't let people have essential things, if they don't have a way to do essential things in a safe way, and you sort of are overly restrictive, they'll just do it out of your sight. Right? So if you close parks, I was just thinking this is just increasing the odds of indoor gatherings. And at that point, we already had people arguing that there was aerosol transmission. And there was sort of increasing evidence for it. At that point, you had tons of super spreading events that were all indoors. There was enough epidemiology. Plus, you had all these previous pandemics, right, from flu to everything. And there's just the physics of it. It's going to dilute outdoors compared to indoors. Like doesn't require just being at a park and sunlight and effects of UV. Just was sensible that if we could get people to be outdoors rather than indoors, it was going to be better. So I started writing these pieces saying, look, don't close parks. If you have congestion, try to manage the congestion. Try to sort of have spacing in the parks and all of that. So I wrote, and then by then I'm kind of like, all right, I'm writing about this.
Before we get to the rest of this interview with Dr. Eric Topol, a quick word from Medscape. Remember, this and every other episode of Medicine in the Machine has an accompanying transcript available at medscape.com, where you can also find an accompanying embedded media player, allowing you to listen along as you read. You can also subscribe to this podcast right there on our site on Spotify and wherever podcasts are found. Okay, now back to the interview.
Where you called out the beaches, there always was a picture of people, a lot of people swarming on a beach, and you say, why are you using that as your call out to the problem of the pandemic? Now, you wrote, then you got into ventilation. I'm being simplistic reductionist here, Zeynep, but you kind of got three big hits here. First was the mask. Then you kind of figured out, we got a problem here, ventilation. We got a serious problem. problem because we're going to be indoors. That's where the super spreaders are. So you really got into that, and you basically autodidactic became an expert in ventilation, filtering, aerosol. Tell us about
Yeah.
what that was about.
So, because, my sort of writing about parks and outdoors and the beach pictures led me down all the research about the transmission methods. And there was increasing number of events that just simply could not be droplet transmission, right? You had the restaurant with the air conditioner study. You had the choir in Seattle. You had the bus study. So there's all this very interesting shoe leather epidemiology. And I started sort of looking at it and thinking because, the World Health Organization had this ballistic droplet, it just, you spit it out somehow and it kind of lands on the person. And you were just looking at the epidemiology and saying, I was just thinking, there's no way this is droplets. And you could potentially argue fomites and contact, but you have to twist yourself into a pretzel. Like the person in the choir, like, what did they do? Like, how on earth, like, it really wasn't. And then you have the South Korea mega church. And if it was droplets, you shouldn't see this much outdoor-indoor difference, right? Like they're just, so the theory of droplets just was not making sense. So I started reading up on that. And then as I read, I encountered the aerosol engineers who normally do stuff like indoor air quality and things like that. And they were tearing their hair out because, as we have since learned, and they have since, I think they're successfully convinced a lot of people, including Dr. Fauci now, it's like he's just come out and said it, is that the World Health Organization has an incorrect understanding of the micron sizes and the sort of the physiology of droplets and the physics of it, the airborne, the flotation. So I started reading all these papers and I'm like, wow, these people are right. And also, once again, there was a sociology to it. And I used to teach the John Snow, the pump and the cholera thing, because it's a very good way of thinking about sort of this, how do you eliminate alternative hypotheses, right? So I knew about all of that. So I had known about the miasma theory. So I realized there's like almost a sociological thing in which the public health community was from 1910 or so, right? They had fought successfully theories that were wrong, like the miasma theories that assumed that dirty air brought you the diseases, right? It was the pollution, and instead they kind of had the germ theory. So they'd actually made a successful argument that these little things that you don't see in this beautiful looking, clear glass of water are killing you, while this filthy air that you're breathing is harmless, right. So that was like, that's counterintuitive, right? So they were right, and the public was wrong, but they've almost had this sort of knee-jerk reaction as a sort of a field plus, because they're normally are not working in community. Normally they're working in hospitals. In hospitals, as you know, and probably a lot of your listeners know, droplet precautions and airborne precautions are a big deal. So if you say airborne precautions, it's a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult, and so they were used to that debate.
Right.
But that's not what we were talking about here, right? We weren't talking about sort of what should healthcare workers do when because hospitals have multiple layers of protection. They have engineering, they have ventilation, they have this, they have that. So I thought, this is nuts. Like, we are 6 months into a respiratory pandemic. I am still smelling bleach everywhere, but nobody's opening doors or windows. Right? I mean, it was kind of like I was just walking by places and I'm just kind of looking, and everybody's like, I'm getting these emails from planes, like airplane, Delta, United. They're sending me emails saying, we clean all the sort of seats, all between things, and nobody's telling me something that is actually to their advantage. They do air exchange like 10 times an hour and they filter. So
Yeah.
I was kind of like, why? I don't want to breathe your bleach, right? That's actually not good. I don't want all those disinfectants, and we don't have a lot of fomite. Like we have almost no cases. So it was just driving me nuts that we were not doing this. And I thought, this is so terrible, because we're going to try to open schools. We're going to try to open colleges. People are going to get quarantine fatigue. And some of the ventilation precautions that people can do is as simple as opening a window, meeting in the porch instead of, in the living room, where the weather is okay. So there's all these very low hanging fruit, but we're not telling people that. And if you sort of still to this day, you go to World Health Organization's public facing page, there's a what you should do sort of page that's for the public. And there's like about a fifth of the page is about the safe use of hand sanitizers. There's not a single word about open a window, think about ventilation, right? This is October. So I thought, all right, I am going to dive into this very deep. And at this point, the Atlantic's kind of like, all right, she lost her mind. We're just going to let her be. And so I went to my editor and said, I'm going to write about aerosols and ventilation. And he's kind of, do not approach the mad woman kind of thing. And it was like, what? And I said, I want to really do this. And to their, like, I'm super grateful for this. And it was like, okay, I'll look at the draft. And then I turned in 5,000 words, which for anybody not familiar with it is not a length you write at anything. Like you write 1,000 words, like that's an op-ed, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, that's maximum. So turning in 5,000 pages in a topic that seemed kind of obscure at the time. This is July. And I just remember him kind of going, well, all right, okay, if you want. And then I was so sort of, at this point, I'm like caution to the wind kind of situation, because I'm just upset that we're not opening windows. We're not going outside enough. And they let me publish. Like they said, all right, we went through fact checking. In fact, I was so paranoid. I like hired someone and I said, please, like, go at it like I'm your worst enemy and try to see if I got anything wrong, because it's possible. Like, I guess I tried to like make sure I got everything right. I must have read at least 100 papers again, because that's the thing I can do is I don't just talk to people, because just talking to people isn't enough, because they don't agree, right? The experts don't agree. So I read lots of papers. I wrote this thing. And what happened next was amazing too, because at this point, I'm kind of like, every time I do it, I'm kind of like, all right, I don't know what I got wrong. But I got a lot of people read it. Some people, I like sent it to Dr. Fauci and said, what are we doing on this? And apparently he sent it to, among other things, to the CDC task force. There was already scientists kind of lobbying him and others on this. There was a letter to the World Health Organization that was signed by, I think, 293 like top scientists and all of that. So there's all this stuff, but that was directed towards the scientific community. I had written something long that was directed at the normal people who wanted to understand what was going on. I just sort of explained as much as I could, not necessarily assuming they knew. So that article did, there's a lot of audience for it, but it really helped, I'm told, sort of put pressure on various health agencies to say, what are we going to do about ventilation? What are we going to do about this? So that was the ventilation piece.
No, that was a great contribution. It rebooted the kind of sense of the aerosol importance, the outdoor, not to be so hard on people about that, and to actually take the UV light, the outdoor environment to our advantage, that there is a liberation there and it's good for mental health and whatnot. So it was a great contribution. But you know what, my favorite of all your writings, and I've read a lot of them, maybe not all, was the most recent one. This was amazing. I mean, because I've been on this super spreader thing, Kai Cooper-Schmidt in Science wrote a really good piece. Adam in Europe has written several, articles. But, you took it to another level. You got granular. You got, I don't know how many words. That must have been more than 5,000.
5,000, yeah.
More?
Again,
like
yeah,
8,000.
something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it was really, you got into it and you got the recognition it deserves. And if we could, like Japan, They made super spreader cluster busting their primary, mission. If we could do that, but why don't you tell us what propelled you? Because it obviously interacts with the mass and the aerosol.
Right, it does, doesn't
a
it?
building block, right?
So it was another building block because because of everything I had done since then, like we did the Japan, I had gotten like my sort of very deep into the science of aerosols, and part of the argument for aerosols is of course the super spreading events. And so at this point I'm reading all the papers, and one of the things that is my longtime interest, sort of this kind of complex systems thinking, is how the distribution, the probability distribution really matters, right? This is something that we, once again, when we teach methods, we try to teach. And like we're more used to thinking in, the sort of what we think of as the Gaussian distribution, where the average is representative. Like if you look at something like height, most people are neither tall nor short, right? This kind of is just the intuitive way of thinking about stuff. But there's a lot of things that are they're skewed distributions with these fat tails, like wealth, right? Some people have a lot of money in this world right now. So there's all these things that are, and they behave differently, and you have to think about them differently. So at this point, it had become increasingly clear that there were enough papers showing that this was a super spreading kind of pathogen. As you've noted, there was the science article in Science by Kai. I think he'd written it in May, but it wasn't very it was kind of like, here, take a look at this. It was a great article. I loved it, but people didn't take it and say, well, then what do we do? Right? There was that part. There was another article in Bloomberg at the same time, like in May. But once again, they were making the point very well. I love those articles. They were making the point, like, look at the super spreading. This is really super spreading heavy. But there wasn't this, so what does this mean? How do we think about it? Because that's another question, right? That's something you normally have the World Health Organization and the CDC do for you. They look at the epidemiology and they say, you know what, this is a super spreading disease. Therefore, you got to do this, this, and this, compared to, say, flu, which is less of a super spreading disease. In fact, not much. So that wasn't happening. And I thought, all right, and it was just sort of in my head. And I thought, okay, I got away with ventilation. So maybe I can write one more thing about the over dispersion, the way it's concentrated. And just sort of read and thought and talked to tons of people. There's all these experts and who are kind of working on aspects of the implications of super spreading, but there wasn't a piece that said to the public, once again, here's how it all comes together. So I did just with the ventilation, there wasn't a piece that said, here's how it all comes together. So I said, all right, let me do here's how it all comes together to the best of my ability. And I wrote that. And at this point, my editor at The Atlantic's she said, just completely given up on any sense. No, he's great. He's really just very supportive. And he was like, all right, let's do this. Another 5,000 word piece on something that, because I think people want the information. They want to be empowered. They do not, they want to be treated as partners. And again, in an ideal world, this is what the CDC and the World Health Organization would be doing for us. So I did write that, and fascinating luck for me, it happened, I think I published 2 days before the White House super spreader event.
Yeah.
However, that happened.
How you did that. It was the warm up for the Rose Garden.
Yeah, it was kind of whatever happened at the White House, which we still don't completely know. And also just the day I published it, one more big paper came out from India with, I think 70,000 sort of patients they traced, and it found the same thing, that it was all super spreader heavy, 70% did not transmit. About 10% of the transmissions were responsible for, I think 70, 80%. So there was immediately, there was both a big deal event in which lots of people got infected. However, it happened in White House because we don't have the contact tracing, but plus there were all these papers. But plus, I think what work with that is that there's all these mysteries to this disease that I think we were kind of papering over. For example, why in Italy, in Lombardy, but not Rome? I kept sort of hearing these explanations, the weather, the vitamin D, they have this and they have that. And I kind of kept looking at the data and thinking, this is what, like in evolutionary biology, you call it a just so story. Like something happens to have evolved and you go back and think exactly what might have worked, but you're actually making up a story. It doesn't really explain it seems like a good story, but it doesn't really exclude other explanations. So all the things I was reading about, why Lombardy but not Rome, or why not, like, if it's the weather, why not the bordering Switzerland area? If it's this, why that city? Like, you can't really explain why. Yes, I can explain why big cities get hit, right? I can explain, the age gradation matters. But there are so many similar places. Like, there were places in Ecuador with bodies in the street and not in Colombia. Like, it just wasn't making sense. Right. So it kind of made sense of all these seeming puzzles that we were, I think, sweeping under the rug. Like, we had a story for each of them, but it didn't really hold together. And it's not intellectually as satisfying sometimes to say, just a bunch of bad luck coming together was the early trajectory. But that wasn't all. There were all these places that were supposed to get catastrophes, like Japan, that did not. Or South Korea had multiple major outbreaks. South Korea had terrible luck that they had the mega church super spreading very early on when the world wasn't ready at all. And how did they manage? So there were all these sustained success stories that also weren't being explained. So when you went back and kind of tried to make sense of it, cluster busting, which involved, of course, understanding ventilation.
Yes.
Right? So that turned out to be really an aerosol transmission. That turned out to really fit things together. Now, I'm not saying that like that's the end of the story. It's very humbling. I love reading like history of this kind of stuff. And one of my favorite is probably yellow fever, because it's very puzzling until you know what's exactly happening, which is that it's mosquitoes. And also it's mosquitoes, and you have to have a particular incubation period. So if you don't know this, it looks like the weirdest thing, right? Somebody sick comes into the city, but nobody in their household gets sick. But everybody like 5 houses down gets sick 3 weeks later. But the people in prison don't get sick at all. What's going on, right? It's like, it looks so weird until you understand it's the mosquitoes. The prison is protected because it has high walls. The mosquitoes can't fly over it. The people in the household don't get infected because the person's not transmitting. And the 3 houses down just happens to have a pot of water in the, like, so in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. But if you don't have that sort of what happened. So if you read about the sort of contemporaneous accounts of people trying to puzzle through yellow fever, they weren't stupid at all. Like, they really thought hard about the evidence, but it was just very hard to put together until you did. And once you do it, in hindsight, it looks obvious.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of a thing about, like, some things aren't obvious till somebody comes and says, that's what's going on. And in hindsight, it goes, oh, that makes sense. It just brings everybody together.
Well, that's the theme here. You keep doing that. And so in the case of the super spreaders, there were some articles using various tools like genomics to show that 80%, 90%, 70% of the events, transmission chains, were through super spreader events. And the other were, of course, most transmissions weren't even occurring, outside of super spreader events. So, I think it's extraordinary, because here again, just like you did with Twitter and Facebook, pre-pandemic, where you wrote Twitter and tear gas, and you kind of really been all over the potential downsides of social media and the election and Zuckerberg and all these other things. You are like, so if I look up prescient in the dictionary, I think I might see your picture. I don't know, but really. Now,
that's very kind.
No, I think it's true. But what you do is you stand behind, my take is, you have the data, you read assiduously, you review all the evidence, and you think logically, you think mathematically and logically, and you come to, and you stick with it. You don't get, modulated, tempered, get diluted in terms of your thinking. So now what's the next piece? Where are you going next?
I don't know. Like, see, one of the things is like, if you do these sort of big think attempts, like the yellow fever again is humbling. You had all these smart people get it wrong because they couldn't put the missing piece. So there's no doubt that I'll get stuff wrong eventually, right? That's just like, that's gonna happen. But what I'm trying to do is like, I there's a couple of things that I think I stumbled onto. One of them is because my other original field is also so, didn't have the disciplinary constraints. So I'm used to thinking about like the way technology interacts with society. I'm used to thinking about everything from how does machine learning work to how does human psychology interact with social media, right? There's no way to think only one of those things, right? So you have to understand a bit of like it's a weird thing. It's not really, it's a generalist kind of thinking, but it's not without like empirical grounding in your whatever it is you're working in, because otherwise you can just become a contrarian, right? And that's like the nightmare, is that like, but I think I've been sort of careful so far, but it's really easy to go from like, I'm a generalist and I have all these ideas, to be like a contrarian and say, oh, I know like this, and now I'm gonna opine about everything. So you have to be super cautious about that too. So what I've been trying to do is like it's in programming, in computer science, there's like this idea of the full stack developer. Like you go every level of the thing. And I think what we do with these things, like the say masks or ventilation or super spreading, or thinking about like the technology and society, is that the way we tend to think about it is people tend to specialize in looking at one aspect of it, right? The tech people know the code. Sociologists might sort of look at society, psychologists might look at human this or that, like, but it doesn't occur in any one of those fields, right? So we're kind of like, everybody's looking for the keys under their own particular light.
Yeah.
Where, because that's, as an academic, we tend to train people that way too, right? We have a very beautiful tradition in the US, liberal arts education, which is amazing. Like you get to be this sort of broad thinker, and then we take people to grad school and then we narrow them down, which is fine too, but then you have to pull them out again, right? So I have no problem with like people, like, because getting deep in one particular aspect and contributing is also a very valuable thing, because like without that, you're superficial, right? You need the people who are going to go and like, with ventilation, you needed the people who are going to figure out exactly what was wrong with the physics of droplets, and that's a deep thing, right? You need sort of, you devote your life to that kind of engineering, so you need that. But you also need people who kind of can remain empirically grounded, in that you're not making up your own facts. You are doing scientific thinking and analysis, but then bringing it together with everything else this interacts with. Right. It's kind of systems thinking. And I kind of stumbled onto it, I think partly because I don't have a very good educational background. I kind of went from field to field. I don't come from an elite background at all. Like most of my schooling has been pretty terrible. I put myself through college, so I didn't really get beaten into the disciplinary mold very well, because I never had that. And again, I'm not saying the disciplinary mold is terrible in and of itself, but there are a lot of problems, especially these wicked problems, these complicated problems, for which you need the full stack, the across the spectrum kind of thinking. And I just happen to, it's not just a knack, it's just sort of the way my topics have been. Plus, I have the privilege that I'm not a journalist, because journalists can't read 100 papers and then write 5,000 words on it. Like that's not, they're not really, and it's not their fault. They're not allowed to do that. But when you're normally, again, this is what the CDC or the World Health Organization would do. So I could just step up and say, all right, you know what? I'm going to read these things and also like try not to, as you say, like caveat myself to death.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm wrong, but that should come from other people. I should make the strongest case I can for what I think is correct. And then, like, if it turns out I'm wrong, I should be first to say, oh, right, like somebody showed me I was wrong. That's a very important thing. But I shouldn't like just make a mealy mouth. I should say, this is what I think is happening, and here's the best case for it.
Yeah, and I think that's really essential. That's one of the great lessons we can get from you, Zeynep, is that, you know, as you stand behind the work. I remember I tweeted at you about how much work they had to do to review all those papers for the super spreader. I mean, you know, that is a lot of work. People don't know how many tens of hours, hundreds of hours to put into it, you know. So anyway, I think what you have done here in your career already, and you're still very young, and you could retire now and you could feel really good about it, right? What do you think is next? What's kind of,
I don't know, be very wrong about something, I suppose. But see, the thing is, once again, I really don't know, but I keep wanting to say this. Like, I think the value here is like trying to do this kind of thinking rather than, you know, just taking these big swings. Like, and you're going to miss, like, there's no doubt that anybody who's taking a lot of big swings is going to miss something, but like the swings are still worth sort of trying to take and think through. And I don't know, like in terms of, I keep joking, like, because normally I write technology and society and there's all this stuff going on in my home field, and I'm like writing about K and over dispersion, and sort of I've been joking, like I want to get back to my hobby of technology and society, because, you know, we have all these Twitter and Facebook things. I definitely want to go back and write a lot more about technology and society, because I think it's pretty clear to people that we are going through a major historic transition, and we need to tame these things.
Yeah, well,
They're
you've been
great
all
and
over that. Yeah,
yeah,
you know,
they've been
you were
great.
there years before anyone else, I think, had, you know, foreseen the downsides, you know, how the 2016 election could be manipulated through social media, through interference, and of course the Twitter and everything else. But, you know, I think what's striking here is it's a pattern that we see. It's kind of like a deep neural network of Tufekci here. Your input. The output is, we should be doing more of that, because, you know, one of the things striking is, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I can't write in the Atlantic. You have to be a journalist and be great with metaphors and have flowery, you know, language that's vivid. Well, you know what? You can write beautiful work in the Atlantic, which has had you know, some of the best articles of contributions of a whole pandemic and beyond. But and what you're doing is deep research and formulation of conclusions, and, as you say, not mealy mouth about it. So anyway, I want to congratulate you. This has been, I want to talk to you more, because this has been so much fun.
So I just want to say a few things about like the sort of write about the Atlantic or something. So one of the things we were just chatting about it. I'm thinking about starting my own little newsletter about how do we think about all of this. So that's because I've been here. That question's coming up a lot. And one of the things I want to tell people is that I'm actually, and I'm not at all like false humility here, right? This is not false humility. I'm the woman who just said, all right, I'm going to get canceled, and said CDC and WHO are wrong. So I'm not being humble, but I swear I am not a good writer, right? I'm an idea person. I'm a thinker. And I have learned how to write better, you know, through many years. English isn't even my first language, right? So, yeah. So, I mean, like, the thing is, when you read my stuff, and I get editors come and say, this sentence makes no sense, and I rewrite it till it makes sense. But the thing here that's carrying the work is the ideas. So I just want to tell people that it's not like about writing. Like, I'm never going to write the great American novel. because
Right.
it would be terrible. I'm never going to write like that kind of literary stuff that I adore and I read, but that's not what I do. But this kind of thinking, like sort of looking across multiple domains, trying to do synthesis, trying to kind of argue with yourself, but also come to a conclusion. These are not things that require like degrees or things. They're things that require work, for sure. Like you have to do the work, but they're not things that require literary talent. It's just, you learn how to think that way and you do the work.
Yeah, well, you do it, and we're learning from you. And
Thank you.
you're become kind of really what I would say is like an oracle for a lot of.
Thank you.
I'm really big into AI and the digital world in medicine, but having you come into that too, and have your influence, your clear-eyed thinking, will certainly be helpful in the future as well. So. Zeynep, I want to thank you. This has been really fun. We'll have to get you back because you are just, you're
Thank
a
you.
blast.
I mean,
really.
it's just been amazing to meet people like you through social media too. It's kind of like I have discovered so many cool people, and then I look at people, and it's my pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to have the chance to connect.
Well, we'll be following you and your next chapter with great interest.
Thank you.
I don't. Some people are going to root for you to be wrong, but I don't know. It's pretty unlikely.
You know what? It'll happen, and it's just like that's the nature of taking swings. I just want to tell people I'm not afraid of being wrong. I just want to make sure that I did my best. Like I did my best intellectual effort, and that's all I can do.
Love it. Thanks so much, Zeynep.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining us on Medicine and the Machine. Really fascinating conversation with Professor Tufekci, and we'll look forward to hearing your comments. Thanks.
And that concludes this episode of Medicine and the Machine. Medicine and the Machine is produced by Medscape editor Robbie Atuma. The host this week in the interview was Dr. Eric Topol. Absent was co-host Dr. Abraham Verghese. Remember, there is a full transcript of this episode available at medscape.com. Medicine and the Machine is a podcast available wherever podcasts are found.